The destiny of the forgotten daughter. The clatter of her worn shoes against the polished marble echoed through the grand hall like a gunshot. Sarah felt the world tilt violently as her glasses slid down the bridge of her nose. In a second, she was on the floor, her palms stinging from the impact, and the hem of her dusty blue dress crumpled beneath her knees. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy blanket of shock that stifled the mocking laughter of her sisters, who watched from the safety of the silk divans. Just inches from her hands, she saw a pair of finely crafted leather boots. Sheikh Idris stood motionless, an imposing figure whose very presence seemed to absorb the lamplight of the palace. Sarah did not dare look up. She knew her hair was a mess and that the smudge of ash on her cheek from her morning chores made her look like anything but a nobleman's daughter. She expected a cold reprimand, or worse, the silent contempt she already knew so well from her own family. However, what she heard was the soft rustle of fabric. Idris knelt, breaking all protocol until his face was level with hers. Through her fogged lenses, Sarah saw dark eyes that held no judgment, but rather a vibrant curiosity. A spark of amusement danced in his gaze as he observed the young woman's confusion. Instead of offering a distant hand to help her up so she could be ushered away, he simply waited, allowing her to catch her breath in the center of that silent chaos. The scent of sandalwood in the desert emanated from him, enveloping her and creating a bubble of calm in the middle of the hall. Sarah felt a deep flush creeping up her neck, but when she finally dared to look into his eyes, she didn't find the ugliness her mirrors always screamed about. She found the reflection of a woman who, even in her fall, possessed a dignity that her sister's forced elegance could never reach. It was an eternal moment where power and humility met in a clash of wills. Her sisters, finding their voices, began to offer hurried apologies on Sarah's behalf, calling her clumsy and scatterbrained. They tried to brush her aside with sharp gestures, wanting to erase the scene so the Sheikh could refocus his attention on their perfectly painted faces. But Idris raised a hand, stopping the flow of poisonous words without even looking at them. His attention was locked on Sarah, as if she were the only living being in the entire vast expanse of the palace. With a fluid, firm motion, he took Sarah's hand. His touch was warm and steady, a promise of stability in a world that had always made her feel off balance. As he helped her to her feet, he did not let go immediately. Instead, he gently adjusted her glasses with one finger, a gesture so intimate and tender that it caused a collective gasp among those present. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the realization that something fundamental had just shifted. Her father, the vizier, approached with a pale face, attempting to minimize the disaster, but Idris interrupted him with a deep voice that vibrated with authority. He declared that authenticity was a jewel rarer than any diamond in his mines, and that he had found in that stumble a truth that perfection would never show him. The Sheikh's words fell like stones into a deep well, leaving ripples that shook the very foundations of the family hierarchy. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a mix of terror and an unknown hope. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't looking at her through her flaws, but through her essence. Idris asked for her name, ignoring the interruptions of the others, and when she answered in a whisper, he repeated it as if it were a sacred mantra, giving it a weight and value she never believed she possessed. The sun began to dip behind the dunes, staining the palace in shades of ochre and violet. In that twilight, the figure of the ugly daughter no longer seemed small or insignificant. Under the protection of the Sheikh's gaze, Sarah straightened her back, and the dirt on her dress seemed to transform into armor. Her sister's jewels paled beside the brilliance of her eyes, which now reflected the light of a new life just beginning to dawn. Idris did not ask to see the other candidates, nor did he take interest in the offered dowries. His choice was already made, not as a matter of politics or lineage, but because of the spark of fire he saw in the gaze of a woman who refused to be invisible even when the world pushed her to the ground. They walked together toward the terrace, leaving the whispers and resentment behind, while the desert wind carried the scent of change and freedom. That night, the palace did not speak of marriage contracts, but of an unexpected miracle. Sarah, who had spent years hidden in the shadows of the library and the kitchens, now found herself at the center of a whirlwind that would take her far from the walls that oppressed her. Every step she took beside the Sheikh was a declaration of independence, a goodbye to the girl who believed her worth depended on the approval of those who never loved her. Sheikh Idris knew his choice would cause unrest in the court, but he did not care. He had spent his life surrounded by artificial beauty and bought loyalties, and seeing a woman fall and rise with such fire in her eyes was the most honest gift he had ever received. In Sarah, he did not see an ugly daughter, but a potential queen, a partner whose mind was as vast as his kingdom and whose heart was unbreakable. As the stars began to pepper the night sky, Sarah realized that her fall had not been an accident, but the catalyst for her destiny. The path ahead would not be easy, but she would no longer walk it alone or with her head bowed. The hand holding hers was strong, and the voice calling her name reminded her that true beauty resides in the courage to be yourself, no matter how many times the world tries to strike you down. The shadows of the past began to dissolve under the light of the full moon. Sarah looked back one last time, seeing the hall where she once felt small, and felt a pang of compassion for those trapped in their own vanity. Then she turned towards Idris and the future that awaited her beyond the dunes, ready to write her own story in the sands of time, where names are etched not for their appearance, but for their greatness. Finally, the silence of the desert enveloped them, a shared silence that spoke louder than any royal decree. In that sacred space between two souls, a romance was born that would defy the laws of the palace and the expectations of an empire. The story of the forgotten daughter and the sovereign of the desert was only just beginning, and the world would soon discover that sometimes the person everyone ignores is the only one capable of changing the course of history.